Hello artists, so today I'm going to be showing you how I use Photoshop to go through and make my source photos that I then use as references for my oil paintings. I use Photoshop as sort of like a collage tool. I go through and I use different tools and different techniques that I've just learned by picking up and using Photoshop and Googling things. I'm going to be showing you those tools today. Mainly going to be showing you how to like layer things, how to transform and warp images in Photoshop, how to use the quick select tool, and about adjustment layers and layer masks. This is not going to be a tutorial where you really learn how to make full-blown works of art in Photoshop. I'm not that kind of artist, really. Think of it as just kind of a more digital advanced collage, right? It's almost like you're cutting out images from a magazine or a newspaper, and instead of just being stuck with those sizes and those images, then you can go through and transform it and edit it, and you have a lot more freedom in how your source turns out. So I'm going to be showing you those tools today in this video. So let me show you first a little bit of my process before I even get to the painting. So I like to take all of my own photos. You can see here, this is a photo shoot that I did when I was still living in Europe. I like to shoot in film. It's a little more warm, a little more grainy, not the same as shooting in digital, but I like to go out and just have my camera on me, take photos. This is when I was living in Albania, so this is the capital city in Albania, Tirana. Go through, I take photos, I try to sort of, shoot a lot at once if I can, sort of get the same. I really liked how this film turned out. Just kind of naturally turned out really warm. Lots of reds and purples present in there. And during this photo shoot, I met up with a friend of mine, and we were taking some photos, and some of them turned out okay. Like this one didn't turn out the best. Some of them turned out really good. I really liked the focus of this one. I love the colors. And then I end up with this photo, which I didn't like at first. But what will happen is I'll go through and I'll want to make a new painting, and I'll look back at my photos and I'll be like, well, you know what? I can work with this. Maybe I can do something with this. So additionally, I end up with a lot of photos like this and like this, right? So maybe you've taken a photo using your phone or your camera before, and it's blurry and it's out of focus, and you try to do that on purpose. In film, it's sort of a different kind of blur that you get. I really like when sort of film gets a little messed up, and sometimes when light gets in the camera, you have a light leak, or sometimes you can take a photo when you hold your shutter open a little bit too much and it's dark out, and you get lots of weird stuff happening. And over my shootings of hundreds of reels, I have a lot of photos like this that I sort of acquired, and I kind of get inspired to add pieces of these into my artworks, right? Now, as my artwork has evolved, is I kind of like to save these photos and use pieces of this with the assistance of Photoshop to make my sources. So let's get into how I made this image. So here I am in Photoshop with the image I just showed you. And this was the source photo that I created for a pretty, I felt like, successful painting. It ended up being really good. She did this painting over in only 8 hours, so it went really went by pretty quickly. And I thought that the end product ended up turning out really well. But this did not start off this way. I had to sort of amalgamate a lot of photos together to make what we have here. So I'm just going to show you again kind of what we started with. I'm going to remove all these layers, kind of give you a preview of what happened. And I started with that photo I just showed you before. I really like this portrait. I love the colors, and I wanted to have it be sort of the focus of my artwork, right? I like to have things in my paintings be a little loose, be a little more color driven, be a little more like painterly. But I do like to have a subject. I kind of feel like that grounds it in reality. So I have my friend here. I shot this photo of her. And again, I really wanted to include some of the photos that I showed you before. So I went through and I added these things in Photoshop. You can tell here that it's kind of half transparent. It kind of hides the person. I cut out her portrait underneath and added a new layer just to make her a little bit bigger in the frame. And again, adding more things on top to sort of layer in like a photographic lasagna here, layering in those elements, making them a little bit more bold and darker. This one I think had another adjustment layer on it to make it a little more contrasting. And then I have this layer here where I used a gradient to make it so it's like really strongly the previous image on one side and blending into the other image here. And then another one to sort of like have like a kind of triangle in the middle showing through. And of course, if you watch my other video, I have my grid there that helped me paint this. So this image that I created is just really kind of me free form, just diving into Photoshop and seeing what I can do. And I kind of just mess around with stuff and add things and fool around until I kind of end up with something I like. You know, sometimes I like to spend a lot of time to really think about what I can make. Sometimes I just kind of go with more or less what the photograph is. And I don't really like to edit too much. I feel like just the photo that I ended up taking originally really worked well as a painting on itself. But with this process I'm going to teach you today is I want to show you a little bit of some tips and tricks that I use in Photoshop, right? It's a really good thinking tool, right? It's a really good collage tool that I use it for, and it helps me make realistic, detailed paintings. So we're going to go through and we're going to make a new image, and I'm just going to show you maybe 4 or 5 tools that I use to make an artwork source. So first thing you do is you want to start with your canvas size. It helps when you grid later. It helps give you your aspect ratio correctly, right? So it's not like a square. If you're working with a rectangle, then you're gonna have to cut parts off, and that's important for composition. We want to have our aspect ratio be correct the first time. So if you're working with 40 by 50 centimeters, you can put that in here. If you're working like 60 by 40 or whatever the case might be, I'm just going to go with 40 by 50. That's like a pretty common canvas size that I've seen before, but anything you do, it's nice to measure your canvas before you start, just so you know what you're going to be working on. So I'm here with a new blank canvas, a new blank layer here in Photoshop. Now, I have some photos that I've taken before, and I'm going to use them as references. Now, sometimes in the past, I have used images I found from the internet, images I cut from magazines. I was using a lot of images that I was just sort of finding and being inspired by, and then I wanted to put together to show some juxtaposition. But as I've sort of evolved as an artist, I really kind of like to use my own images. I really love film photography, and that's kind of just been a kind of hobby of mine. And through that hobby, I get a lot of cool images, and I like to then turn around and use them for paintings that I make, right? So I have some example images here. I'm going to drag them into Photoshop one by one. I can't promise you that this source we're going to make today is going to be very good, but mainly what I want to do is show you some of the tools that I use in Photoshop if you're really new to Photoshop. Just want to put a disclaimer: if you are good at Photoshop, you'll probably look at some of these methods that I use and be like, why is he doing it like that? This is just kind of what I've Googled as I've gone through. There's probably really streamlined ways of doing all these things. Photoshop is an incredibly complex platform, and there are people who have careers using it. So they might have a really better way of doing things than I do. I just like to get myself a source, and then the source doesn't need to look good. The painting looks good, right? So the source is just grounding my painting, giving me things to work with, keeping my grid correct, and making sure things are to proportion. It doesn't have to be the final product. So I'm gonna go through, and I have this image here. I'm gonna drag it onto my canvas here. I'm gonna resize it. And it's just kind of a double exposure image, right? So if you don't know what this is, it's where you take 2 photos on one little piece of film. It's not the same digitally, because digital cameras sort of capture the image and it'll capture another image, and it can kind of do this artificially. But with film, you have a little piece of plastic that's magic and can be sensitive to light, and if you expose it with 2 images, they kind of layer on top of each other like this. And it's really easy to do with film. All the film cameras that I buy can do this kind of thing. And I like to start with this as sometimes as a background, and maybe I can be inspired by it. Maybe I could do something with it. So I believe this might even be Hong Kong, or it might be somewhere in Japan. I'm not sure. It's an older photo. But I'm going to start with this as a background, okay? And maybe I can add or move or change things in the future, but I'm going to start with this as what I kind of work for in the very bottom layer. Sometimes in this process, I'll end up with, 20 different layers, and the bottom layer is something that doesn't even end up in my painting. It's fine. We're all kind of having fun in this process. So I'm going to drag this tram onto here. I'm going to resize it just so it fills, and it can go above if I want it bigger. It can be smaller if I want it smaller. And I'm just going to, whatever, put it there, right? Now, if I'm working on one element at a time, I do like to hide everything else just so I don't have to see it at once. But let's say I want to cut out so I only see this tram, okay? What I would use is the quick selection tool here. So you can click W, that'll give you the option of these three different tools. The quick selection tool is really good. You could use the magic wand tool, but I feel like the quick selection tool is just a nice kind of, a little more of a manual input than the magic wand tool. Try both, see what works for you. The quick selection tool, zoom in here, it selects like colors and similar things. It's sort of algorithm based. It's not AI based or whatever, but it will select similar colors. So if I select some of the text or some of the, it'll probably select that entire reflection of the glass at once, and it'll probably select this whole, so as I sort of hold my mouse down and I drag it across this image, it's going to gradually keep adding things. Now, it's not entirely perfectly smart. You see it added over here in the corner, this chunk of sidewalk. It's okay, I can remove that later. For our quick select tool, we have an addition and a subtraction. So addition, I can start within my quick select area, add it. I can move over here and add something else, right? I have selections that are from all over the place. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try my best to highlight my whole tram here. Get it all added in there. I might not even include that little rail guard. So I have extra stuff here I don't want. I'm gonna go use my subtract one, and I'm going to subtract it a little bit there. That ended up being pretty good. Subtract some stuff here. Hey, there we go. Honestly, not too bad. It's not perfect, okay? As you'll notice when we start to continue to work, the edges aren't the best. If I was a real Photoshop artist, I would show you how to blend the edges and make it look like it really was there, or much better. But again, this is a source. I'm gonna be looking at this as I do that heavy lifting with my brain as I'm painting. So what I can do here is I can either double tap if I'm on Mac or right click. And I like to layer via copy, and then I'll hide this layer. So now I can click, and now my tram is in my previous layer here, right? I can move it around, I can drag it and drop it, and that's, perfect, right? That's whatever I want, right? The second tool I'm going to show you guys how to use is the transforming tool. So if you hit Control T, or there might be Command T if you're on Mac, it gives you the option to sort of move and transform, make it bigger and smaller, kind of similar to how it was when we dropped it in here. If I'm right-clicking here, it gives me an option of how to transform in a couple different ways, right? And there's some really funky ways you can do it. Perspective is good because it puts it into perspective for you. It's really interesting. You can skew, distort. I like warp. Warp is really fun. You can kind of bend it and move it. If you're making a really surrealist image, maybe that can be a kind of cool thing that you want to do. You can always hit Control or Command Z to undo what you've done, of course. Or you can scale it, which is like something we just saw here. You can skew it. I think that just moves it. Let's see. You can skew it, which that kind of moves one edge of it up or down, right? I mean, there's lots of options of what to do here. Transforming is a pretty powerful tool. And if you're editing little elements, it can really help you kind of think about the scale and where it is, right? So I'm going to just scale it, make it that size. That just works for me for now. So I got my tram. I'm going to add another image in here. And what I want to do here is have a subject. You don't need a subject for your artworks. I like to have a subject, even if it's somebody facing away from the camera. I just feel like it kind of puts it into reality. So I'm gonna focus on this guy here. I'm going to remove the things that I don't need. It's not the smartest. It selected his head and then unselected his head, and for me it's like, wouldn't it be obvious? But it is what it is. So not perfect. Just gonna remove this grass here. Good enough for me. Okay, I'm going to layer via copy. I'm going to remove the rest of that, and now he's in my sort of plane here. Maybe I'll put him off to the side or something. So what I want to do with this guy here is maybe I want to change the colors. Maybe I want to make it contrast. Maybe I want him black and white. What we're gonna do here is we're going to add an adjustment layer. So if you go from properties, usually that's what you'll see here. Adjustments gives you a whole bunch of different things you can work with, right? Make it black and white, make it brightness and contrast. We're gonna go ahead and go with hue and saturation for this one. Now, there's a really important little button here that's very tiny, and I don't know why it's so small. I feel like it's an important feature here, but it's this one right here where it says this adjustment affects all layers below, and you click to clip to the layer below it. So if I want to change the hue for the entire image, I can right here. But if I want to just work with this element only, I need to click this. Then it gives me options to make it more saturated. I can make it different colors. I can add a bunch of different stuff here. Maybe I want to increase the contrast. Press that button again. It still works with this bottom layer right here that is connected to you, right? You see the arrow pointing down. I can mess with the contrast. I can mess with the brightness, make them look very deep fried, you know, whatever I want to do, right? I can do it all in here. I'm just going to leave it as it is. It's not really beautiful looking, but you can kind of get the tool that we used here. Okay, for the final tool that I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you how to make a layer into a gradient. So you saw my previous image that I had, that really nice red photo that had all the light leaks on there. I have another photo here that has some interesting light leaks, and maybe I want to include it. I'm going to make it big because I'm going to have it be sort of cascading over the whole layer here. So with this, I want to make it so it's the image on one side and it's like going to half transparent on the other side. So what I want to do with this is I want to create a layer mask. So this is going to allow me to use my gradient tool to make it so instead of it going from like black to the image, it can go from transparent to the image and show what's underneath, right? I really used that tool a lot in the previous example. So I'm going to go to this little, it almost looks like the Japanese flag in the corner here. I'm going to, with this layer highlighted, I'm going to click layer mask. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my gradient tool, or G, and this will already give me the option to sort of make it half transparent. Now, how you use the gradient tool is kind of up to you. You can make it so it's a really sharp, right, a line here. You can go from top to bottom. I like to have it kind of big and bold like that, and maybe it moves to one direction, and maybe we can go the other way. You know, this can be the kind of stuff that helps make your sources a little more interesting. It's really up to you how you use these tools. So that might be, you know, so that essentially is all of the tools that I used in the previous example. One thing I want you to keep in mind is be open to new tools. Like when you run into a new problem, teach yourself. Whenever I was like, how do I make a layer half transparent? I Googled it, I looked at YouTube videos, I saw somebody using this tool like this, and I was like, I'm gonna do that, and I learned how to do that, okay? So try to be curious, try to teach yourself how to do things. You can really do anything in Photoshop. Be open to learning new tools as you run into new problems, right? That's really, in my opinion, the best way to do Photoshop is not to just take a class on it and learn it. It's to acquire new pieces as you go and streamline your process as you go, and you'll always have the skill to where you need it and always learn as you go. Hopefully this was helpful for you to give you some ideas of some tools to use for your source photo creation. I know our product here was not the best, but it is a little showcase of some different tools that I use to make artworks. Thank you.